My name is Javier, and I work at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, right on the edge of Highway 28. My shift starts when the sun disappears and ends when dawn threatens to color the sky. It's not the most exciting job in the world, but I like the tranquility of the nights. Traffic is scarce, customers are few, and the silence has something hypnotic about it. That night seemed like any other. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered from time to time, as usual. I kept myself busy cleaning the counter and checking my phone when I saw a woman walk through the automatic door. She was pushing a stroller, though her disheveled appearance made it seem like the last thing she cared about was how she looked. She wore a large coat that didn't fit her thin frame, and her hair was tangled, as if she had been battling the wind all night. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to sound friendly, though I couldn't help but notice that something about her made me nervous. She looked at me with dark, sunken eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. "No, thank you. I'm just waiting for someone," she replied, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I nodded, even though there were no cars at the station and no signs that anyone was about to arrive. She stayed by one of the shelves, gently rocking the stroller, as if trying to soothe the baby inside. With nothing better to do, I decided to go to the bathroom. It was a quick trip, just a few minutes. But when I returned, the woman was gone. Her, the stroller, and the baby. The station was still empty and silent, except for the electric hum of the lights. I looked outside, searching for some trace of her. Then I saw it. The baby stroller was abandoned next to one of the gas pumps, motionless in the darkness. A pang shot through my chest. How could someone leave a baby alone at this hour? I quickly went out and pushed the stroller inside the station, where it would at least be warmer. Once inside, I closed the door and brought the stroller closer to the light. The baby wasn't crying or making any noise, which struck me as odd. I crouched down to get a closer look. My breathing quickened. The blanket covering the baby was neatly tucked in, but the small body wasn't moving. With trembling hands, I pulled back the fabric to get a better look. What I discovered left me frozen. The child wasn't alive. His skin was pale and cold to the touch, his lips blue, and his eyes closed as if he were asleep. I stood petrified for a few seconds that felt like an eternity, unable to process what was in front of me. The need to act suddenly shook me. I stood up abruptly and ran to the phone behind the counter. I dialed the police, my hands shaking so much I could barely press the right numbers. "Emergency services?" A voice answered on the other end. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "I'm at the gas station on Highway 28. There's a baby. It looks like someone left him here abandoned, but he's not alive." The operator paused before responding, as if processing my words. "Stay on the line. We're sending a patrol car. Are you sure there's no one else at the station?" I looked around, my heart pounding in my ears. "Yes, I'm alone. At least I think so." But then a soft noise, like a whisper, came from the door. I turned, expecting to see something, but there was no one. Just the cold night wind slipping through the crack. The patrol car and ambulance arrived within minutes, their blue and red lights illuminating the gas station like an eerie spectacle. The paramedics examined the baby, confirming what I already knew: he was dead. One of the officers, a man with a tired face and a firm voice, approached to ask me questions. I answered as clearly as I could, describing the woman and the little that had happened before her disappearance. "We'll do everything we can to find her," the officer said, but there was a skepticism in his tone that I couldn't ignore. The next night, my shift started as usual. But the weight of the previous events wouldn't let me rest. The image of the baby in the stroller kept haunting me, and every time the wind hit the windows or the lights flickered, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was past midnight when the automatic door opened again. I looked up, and there she was, the disheveled woman, wearing the same large coat and tangled hair. Her face looked paler, and her eyes were filled with tears. She took a few shaky steps inside before collapsing on the floor. I ran to her and tried to wake her up, but she only mumbled unintelligible words, as if trapped in some kind of nightmare. I called the police immediately, and they didn't take long to arrive. Hours later, as I finished giving my statement, one of the officers approached me with a somber expression. "The woman you described, she's known. She's an addict and has been in treatment for psychosis. Apparently, she lost her son months ago in an accident. I felt the air grow heavier around me. What do you mean, lost him? I asked, though I already had an idea of the answer. The officer nodded, serious. He died. Under circumstances similar to what you described last night. It seems like something is tormenting her. That night, when I closed the gas station, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman, the baby, and what had happened. What had been real and what hadn't. The world can be a terrifying place, but the most chilling things aren't always the shadows or the whispers in the night. Sometimes, what hurts the most is the way tragedies cling to people, refusing to let go, dragging them into dark places they can't escape. As I turned off the lights and stepped out into the cold early morning, only one thought crossed my mind. There are things in this life more persistent than death, and sometimes, pain is one of them. Next story. It was a night like any other at the gas station. The constant hum of the fluorescent lights mixed with the faint creaking of the walls, as if the building itself was resisting the passage of time. Outside, the road was empty, an endless river of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. The clock read 2 in the morning, and I was alone, as always. My name is Andres, and I've been working here on the night shift for 3 years. I could say I've grown used to the isolation, to the long hours of silence interrupted only by the sound of a distant engine or the noise of the pumps when a customer stopped by. Most of the time, it was truckers or tired travelers looking for bad coffee and expensive gas. But every now and then, someone different would show up. Someone who didn't fit. At first, I didn't notice. How could I? It was easy to think your mind plays tricks on you when you're tired and bored. But there were signs, little details that haunted me when I got home at dawn. A customer who left no footprints on the wet floor, another who paid with bills that seemed old, too crisp. Or the guy who came in on a stormy night and left the door open, but not a single drop of rain came in with him. Most of them didn't talk much, just enough to ask for what they needed: gas, cigarettes, coffee. But their eyes always unsettled me. They had a strange way of looking at me, as if they knew something I didn't. As if they were waiting for me to figure it out. One night, after serving a woman who paid with a bill that vanished from the cash register the moment she handed it to me, I decided I couldn't keep ignoring it. Something was happening at this gas station, something that defied logic. And the worst part was that, deep down, I already knew. The nighttime customers weren't alive. Days passed, and little by little, I began to accept what had once seemed impossible. The customers who came in the early hours weren't like the others. At first, I was terrified, but over time, I started to notice something strange about them, something deeper than their lack of footprints or the coins that sometimes disappeared into thin air. They were searching for something. It wasn't just gas or coffee, it wasn't just a pack of cigarettes they never lit. They came here, to this gas station in the middle of nowhere, for reasons I was only beginning to understand. It was as if this place offered them something they couldn't find anywhere else, a fleeting moment where they could feel, even if just for an instant, like they were human again. I noticed it in their gestures. The trucker who every night turned on the radio and listened to the same old song, humming it softly, even though he never asked for the bathroom keys or bought fuel. The woman with curly hair who always ordered coffee with milk and sugar, taking her time to stir the cup while staring out the window, as if waiting for something to appear on the horizon. And the old man who arrived in a car that looked like it was from the 1950s, always immaculate, who told me stories of places that no longer existed on maps. It was as if this gas station had become a kind of refuge for them. A place where time didn't judge them, where they could pretend nothing had changed. That they were still breathing, that they could still be part of the world of the living, even if only for a few hours. One night, I served a young man with messy hair and a leather jacket. He seemed nervous, as if he wasn't sure he'd taken the right exit off the highway. He asked for a pack of gum and stood by the counter, drumming his fingers as he looked at me. "Is this place yours?" he asked suddenly. "No, I just work here," I replied, trying not to seem too curious. "Must be peaceful," he said, but then, lowering his voice, added, "Peaceful enough to forget who you are, even if just for a while." He said it almost in a whisper, as if testing my limits. I didn't respond right away, but he looked me straight in the eyes, and in that moment, I understood. It wasn't just his comment, or his posture, or even his gaze. It was that inexplicable feeling I now recognized instantly. He wasn't alive either. I don't know why, but I decided to break the silence. "Does it work?" I asked, leaning on the counter. "Forgetting?" The young man smiled, but his expression was heavy with melancholy. "Only for a little while," he replied. "And then, when the sun starts to rise, it all comes back. The road, the accident, the cold." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask him more, to understand, but he just left the gum on the counter and turned to leave. "Thanks for the coffee," he said, even though he'd never ordered one. I watched as he walked out, got into his car, and drove off down the deserted road until the taillights disappeared into the darkness. That night, I stared at the reflection of the gas station lights in the glass of the counter. I thought about what he'd said, about what they were searching for. Maybe this place was like a waypoint for them, a spot on the map where the weight of their stories could ease, even if just for a moment. And as the darkness began to fade with the first rays of dawn, I knew one thing for certain. Even though they could never stay, they would always come back. One quiet night, almost too quiet, someone different arrived. The sound of an engine cutting off broke the absolute silence, and when the door opened, a bell I didn't remember hearing before rang in the air. It was a woman. She wore a simple, worn dress, and in her arms, she held a baby wrapped in a blanket. Her expression was serene, but her eyes spoke of deep suffering. She walked toward the counter with slow, almost floating steps, and looked at me as if she already knew who I was. "I need to talk to you, Andres," she said in a low but firm voice. I didn't ask how she knew my name. I wasn't surprised anymore that these people knew things they shouldn't. I just nodded, offering her a seat by the counter. "Listen to my story," she requested, looking directly into my eyes. Her tale was like a whisper that seeped into every corner of the gas station, wrapping the place in a sense of melancholy. She told me about a young woman who became pregnant with twins during a dark time, marked by riots and scarcity. The woman's husband had died in the unrest, and one of the twins was born with a strange illness that blackened parts of his tiny body. The woman fought to care for her children, but hunger and misery were relentless. The sick baby eventually succumbed, and a man with a bird mask appeared to take the body away. He didn't say a word, just held out his hands and disappeared with him, she narrated. With each passing day, the woman and her surviving son suffered more. Hunger became a constant shadow, pain an endless echo. She didn't know if what kept her alive was her love for her son or her inability to let herself fall completely into despair. When she finished her story, she looked at me with an intensity one had never felt before. "What does life mean?" she asked in a tone that didn't demand an answer, but understanding. I stayed silent. The question hit me like a train, and no matter how much I searched within myself, I couldn't find the words. I was too young, too inexperienced to give an answer that could ease such profound pain. Finally, I looked down and whispered, "I don't know." She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reproach. It seemed more like an acceptance of the inevitable. "Thank you," she said as she stood up, holding the baby carefully. Sometimes, not knowing is also an answer. And as if the wind had reclaimed her, she disappeared. I didn't even hear the bell when the door closed. I was left alone in the gas station, with a strange feeling in my chest. That night, I couldn't help but wonder if my job here wasn't just to sell gas and coffee, but also to bear witness to their stories, to be a presence that reminded them there was still some humanity left in them, even if it was just a reflection. When dawn arrived, the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed softer, less insistent. That day, I understood that my place in this gas station was more important than I had ever imagined. Someone had to listen, even if I couldn't always respond. Next story. My name is Marcos, and I've been working at this gas station for 5 years. It's one of those lonely stations on a back road that no one uses unless they're lost or desperate. I've grown used to the silence of the nights, the constant hum of the fluorescent lights, and the few faces that show up from time to time. But that night was different. The boss had warned me that the new guy would be arriving to join me on the night shift. He said it was to optimize service, though we all know nothing ever happens here. When he arrived, the first thing I noticed was his smile. "Hi, I'm Raul, nice to meet you," he said, extending his hand enthusiastically. He was young in his 20s, with a carefree air and an energy that contrasted with the tranquility of the place. I shook his hand and forced a smile. "Marcos, welcome. I'll show you how things work." As we walked around the station, I explained the basic tasks: how to handle the cash register, check the pumps, and what to do if a customer arrived. Raul listened attentively, but he always found a way to slip in a funny or witty comment. He had that kind of charisma that made any conversation feel light and entertaining. As the night went on, his relaxed attitude started to feel a little odd. Not in a bad way, exactly, but there was something about the way he spoke that made me uneasy. It didn't help when, while we were cleaning one of the shelves, he dropped a joke that left me cold. "You know," he said with a crooked smile as he shook a soda can, "cats are psychopaths. They hunt and torture their prey just for fun. They don't even do it out of hunger. They just like to watch them suffer." I let out an uncomfortable laugh, more out of politeness than because I found it funny. "Oh really? I didn't know that." Raul nodded, amused. "It's fascinating, isn't it? How something so small can be so ruthless." I didn't see the humor in it, but I didn't say anything. After all, it was only his first night. I brushed it off. Weeks passed, and little by little, I got used to Raul. It was impossible not to. His charisma filled the gas station, and his constant jokes eased the monotony of the nights. He was the kind of person who always had something interesting or unexpected to say, though sometimes his comments bordered on eccentric. One night, as the clock struck 3 in the morning and there wasn't a soul on the road, we sat down to chat by the counter. Raul, as usual, had found a way to make me laugh with an absurd story about how he once mistook a poisonous plant for mint on a hike. The conversation flowed naturally, and during a pause, I decided to ask him something that had been on my mind for days. "Hey, Raul, what are you doing here?" I said, vaguely gesturing to the gas station. "I mean, why did you decide to take this job? I'm sure you must have had other, more exciting opportunities." Raul fell silent for a moment, as if thinking about his answer. Then, with that mischievous smile that had become his trademark, he looked at me and said, "Well, I used the afternoons to torture my victims." The way he said it, so casually, so carefree, made me laugh automatically. Maybe it was the accumulated sleep deprivation, or the fact that I'd already spent so much time with him, but the comment didn't strike me as strange. It was so typical of Raul to say weird things that I didn't think much of it. Sure, I replied, playing along. "And what do you do with them afterward?" Raul smiled even wider, leaning his elbows on the counter and staring at me intently. "That depends. Some entertain me more than others." The laughter died a little in my throat, though I tried not to show it. I wasn't sure if it was his tone or the way his eyes gleamed with something hard to define. Something that, for the first time, didn't feel so charismatic. But before I could think more about it, a car pulled into the station, breaking the tension of the moment. Raul jumped up, with his usual energy, ready to attend to the customer. I stayed in my place for a few more seconds, watching him as he walked to the pump with a smile on his face, as if he hadn't said anything out of the ordinary. For some reason, that night didn't feel like the others. And though I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, I couldn't stop a small shiver from running down my back. A year after Raul started working with me, he missed the night shift for the first time. It was strange. Raul had never been late or missed a shift, even though we all know how monotonous this job can be. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he might be sick or had simply forgotten to let me know. However, what happened hours later erased any sense of normalcy. It was almost 6 in the morning, and as I was cleaning the counter, the TV in the corner of the gas station started broadcasting the morning news. A headline appeared on the screen: "Terrifying discovery. Warehouse with 30 coffins and decomposing bodies found on the outskirts of the city." The news showed blurry images of a warehouse surrounded by yellow tape and police officers coming in and out of the place. The anchor spoke of a serial killer who seemed to have been active for several years, using the warehouse as his storage place for victims. My heart began to race, but I forced myself not to think too much about it. The coincidence seemed too improbable. That night, as I prepared for another lonely shift, Raoul suddenly appeared, though this time he wasn't wearing his uniform. He had on a black jacket and worn jeans, with a backpack slung over his shoulder. His expression was relaxed, but his smile no longer had that mischievous air I knew so well. "Hi, Marcos," he said, leaning on the counter as if nothing had changed. "Bro, what are you doing here? Are you okay?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. He let out a soft chuckle. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just stopping by to say goodbye. It's time to move on, you know? This place was fun, but there's not much left for me to do here." Something about his tone deeply unsettled me, but I didn't know how to respond. He extended his hand, and out of reflex, I shook it. Then, with a casual gesture, he turned toward the door. "Take care, Marcos. It was a pleasure working with you." And with that, he walked out of the gas station, disappearing into the darkness of the road. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I noticed he had left something on the counter, a neatly folded letter. I opened it with trembling hands, almost dreading what I might find. The handwriting was Raoul's, neat and precise, and the message was brief but enough to chill my blood. "Thanks for the fun nights, Marcos. You're a good person, but luckily for you, you never gave me a reason to get bored. I hope others are less fortunate. Best Raoul." My hands shook as I held the letter. The message was disturbing enough, but when I turned it over and read what was written on the back, a shiver ran down my spine. "Hey, you know, I hate being bored. That's why I locked a girl in the gas station's basement. Maybe you didn't notice, but she's there, wrapped in a vacuum-sealed bag and stuffed in a black box. She's been there for 8 months." The basement of the gas station was a place I rarely visited. The walls were damp, and the air had a stale smell that seemed to have lingered there for decades. I went down the stairs with Raoul's letter still in my hand, each step echoing deeply in the quiet space. When I reached the bottom, I turned on the fluorescent light, which flickered before dimly illuminating the room. There it was in the center of the room, the black box. It was larger than I had imagined, with a smooth, unmarked design. I approached it, trying to ignore the rapid beating of my heart, and crouched down to open it. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The inside was empty. I let out a nervous laugh. How could I fall for this? I thought, feeling like a fool. Of course it was a joke. Everything Raoul did or said had that theatrical air to it. I slumped against the wall, letting the laughter calm me down a bit. However, when the laughter faded and the silence returned to the basement, something caught my attention. At the bottom of the box, barely visible under the dim light, was an envelope. I picked it up and opened it with shaky fingers. Inside were several photographs and human fingers. The grayish tone of the flesh and the leathery texture left no room for doubt. A chill ran down my spine. I jumped to my feet, the envelope slipping from my hands as its contents spilled onto the floor. "This can't be happening," I muttered, trying to steady my breathing. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered on the other end. "My name is Marcos. I work at a gas station on Highway 45. I found something in the basement, something horrible. I need someone here right away." The operator asked me a few questions to get more details as I continued to describe the find between gasps. She promised to send a patrol car as soon as possible and told me not to touch anything until the officers arrived. I quickly went back up the stairs, leaving the basement behind. I leaned against the counter, feeling cold sweat gather on my forehead. Outside, the road was still empty, and the light of dawn was just beginning to appear on the horizon. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I waited. Every little sound, the hum of the lights, the creaking of the walls, made me jump. Finally, the red and blue flashes lit up the outside of the gas station. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car and walked in with determined steps. I explained everything that had happened, from Raoul's letter to the contents of the box. While one of them checked the basement, the other asked me questions, trying to piece together the puzzle. "This Raoul worked here for how long, you said?" the officer asked as he took notes. "The year. He never seemed, well, yeah, he was weird, but I thought it was just a dark sense of humor." The officer nodded, his expression serious. The second policeman returned from the basement with the envelope in an evidence bag and looked at me with a mix of disbelief and concern. "This isn't a joke," he said gravely. "These fingers are real, and if they've been there for 8 months, like the letter says, it's very likely there are more victims." I felt dizzy. The idea that Raoul could be responsible for something so macabre hit me like a ton of bricks. The laughter, the jokes, the conversations, had it all been a mask? "We need to investigate further," the officer continued. "Do you have any way to contact him? A phone number, an address?" I shook my head. Raoul had disappeared without a trace, and now he seemed more like a ghost than a person. As the police collected evidence and asked more questions, one thought hammered in my head: what if this was just the beginning? I couldn't help but look out at the road, half expecting to see his figure appear, with that mischievous smile that now felt like a bitter memory. But all I saw was the cold, indifferent dawn, as if nothing had happened. Months passed, and though the police worked hard on the case, they never found Raoul. He seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of questions and nightmares. Every time they called to give me an update, it was always the same: no new leads. At first, I lived in fear. Every shadow in the gas station made me jump, every customer's face seemed vaguely similar to his. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching me. I even stopped working nights. The boss understood my situation and assigned someone else to the night shifts. Still, the weight of what happened never fully went away. Over time, the adrenaline of terror turned into something else, a kind of unsettling emptiness, as if Raoul were still present in some way, in my mind or in my life. His memory seeped into moments of calm, into the monotonous days where the silence felt heavier than usual. The officers said it was most likely that Raoul was far away, maybe in another state, perhaps even another country. People like this rarely stop, one of them told me during our last conversation. And that phrase stuck in my mind, tormenting me with a question I'll never be able to answer. How many new faces in gas stations or remote stores are now seeing his charismatic smile without knowing who he really was? Today, I look back and think about everything that happened, trying to make sense of it. Raoul was an enigma, an abyss disguised as charisma. He was someone who could make you let your guard down with a smile and then destroy you with a word. And though it terrifies me to admit it, I think that's what made him so dangerous. He didn't seem like a monster. He seemed like someone you could laugh with, someone you could work nights with without suspecting that behind it all was a dark, ruthless side. There are nights when I wonder if I was lucky or just blind. Did I really never give him a reason to get bored with me? Or was I part of his game in some way without realizing it? Maybe to him, I was just another piece on his board, someone not even worth destroying. And though I want to believe I escaped by luck, sometimes I'm haunted by the thought that maybe he just decided not to act, yet. The gas station still stands with its flickering lights and lonely road. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I look out at the horizon, half expecting to see that familiar figure appear. But I don't know what I'd do if I saw him again. Would I talk to him? Would I run? Would I confront him? In the end, the only thing I've learned from all this is that you never really know people, and that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Raoul remains a ghost in my memory, a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary masks. And though I've tried to move on, I know a part of me will always be waiting for that smile in the shadows, wondering if it will ever cross my path again.